want to begin by wishing a happy Mother's Day to all those who are listening who have answered that high calling of God to be those who help to nurture the next generation. The Lord knows there's a great need for godly mothers in the world, and I want to thank you for your efforts at being faithful to your calling. I'm recording this on the Friday before Mother's Day, but by the time this becomes available, it will be the Sunday when we honor our mothers. So once again, happy Mother's Day. In preparation for the lesson, I did do an internet search and I typed in encouragement for mothers, and it brought up about 14 million results, it said. And it did it in 0.7 of a second to boot. 14 million results on that one phrase, encouragement for mothers. Well, what does that tell us? Well, apparently there is a great need out there for encouragement. And those of you who have been mothers for any time at all understand that often it's a thankless job with a lot of hours and for not a lot of pay. And you certainly need some encouragement. That internet search also told me that apparently there's a lot of advice given out there, some good and some not so good, obviously. I did think about going through all 14 million hits in search of something helpful to offer today. Not really. But imagine how much time that would take. I then decided to do another kind of search. I thought, well, maybe the Bible has something to offer, some help to offer for the overworked and underappreciated moms out there. And guess what? There was something. What I want to do today is to share the stories of 3 mothers from the Bible. Each one of these women was caught up in very, very difficult circumstances in their life. Life hadn't gone as they had planned or perhaps even dreamed. There aren't large sections of scripture even devoted to their stories. In fact, we don't even know the name of one of them. But each story of the 3 has a lesson for all of us, but especially for modern day moms who find themselves in difficult circumstances as well. And maybe that's your place right now in life. Let's start with taking a look at mom number 1. Mom number 1's a widowed mother whose meager resources were multiplied. We read this story in the Old Testament in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. This is the woman, the mother who has no name. Well, she had a name, but the Bible doesn't record what it was. Let me read the text and then we'll talk about it just a little bit. 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go, borrow vessels at large for yourself from all of your neighbors, even empty vessels. Do not get a few. You shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour out into all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full." So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, and they were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he said to her, "There is not one vessel more." And the oil stopped. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest." That's an amazing story when you reflect on it, isn't it? The text tells the story of this widower whose husband, who had a connection to Elisha, referred to there as a son of one of the prophets who had served under Elisha. There were schools of prophets in those days. But this man had passed away and leaving her with no money. Now, that's a hard situation for any woman, especially a mother. But especially in Old Testament times, there was little to no prospects for women in this position, in that culture, leaving her with no option really but to offer her sons as payment for the debt. Though she sought wisdom from God through the prophet Elisha, her expectation for God's provision was at first limited, wasn't it? When Elisha asks her in verse 2, "What do you have in your house?" how does she respond? Well, basically, she says nothing except this one jar of oil. Tough times are like that, right? Tough times tend to limit our ability to see beyond what is right before us. Perhaps things are so rough that that's all we can focus on, and it seems to be the case for this widow. All I have is this one, perhaps even small jar of oil left. Kind of reminds me of some other phrases you read in the Bible occasionally. A couple from the New Testament in the ministry of Jesus, in fact. Jesus was told one time, "There's no more wine." He was also confronted with the fact as he got ready to feed a large crowd of people. His disciples said, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." Kind of sounds very familiar, doesn't it? To the outlook of this mother. But I would remind you, according and as we read the story, we find out something not only about the woman, but about the God she's attempting to serve. While she sees that I have just one jug of oil, one jar of oil, we learn also that a single jar of oil is more than enough for God, isn't it? In a book entitled Preach for a Year, Volume 1, Robert Campbell notes that this woman found the answer to her need in her own home. Elisha's question is a good one, not only for mothers, but for all who trust in God. What do you already have that God can use? Sometimes when we're confronted with those rough stretches in life, we tend to focus on what we don't have and perhaps look outside of ourselves for answers to our struggle. But sometimes we don't see what we already have, even as limited as that might be. And the widow did what Elisha asked. And again, Elisha probably didn't make a lot of sense to the woman, right? One small jar of oil. Elisha tells her to go borrow a bunch of vessels to hold oil, go in with your sons and start filling them. Most of us would have probably thought, well, this isn't going to take long, is it? But yet they kept pouring the oil kept coming until every single empty receptacle was filled. God provided for this woman's needs from what she already had. The amount, though small, was enough for God to multiply so that he could pay off her debt and she could live off of it as well. What an amazing response. What's the main point of this story? I would offer this: whatever you have is enough for God to use. Whether it is much or little, God can accomplish his purposes. See, we serve a God who's not limited by what we have or what we don't have. Take heart. God's work in your life, as a mother in particular, God's work in your life is not limited by what you don't have. It's not limited by what you have as well. God can multiply even the smallest gift that is willingly offered in service to him. Hopefully that's a word of encouragement to those mothers who, again, perhaps life isn't going like they thought, maybe as they dreamed, and they're down to perhaps whatever, one jar of oil left, whatever that would translate into a modern setting, whatever that would be for you. Remember, God can take and multiply what little you have. Praise be to God for that. Next, let's hear the story of mother number 2, mom number 2. Mom number 2 is a mother whose difficult choice impacted generations. A mother whose difficult choice impacted generations. We'll be reading from Hebrews this time in the New Testament, chapter 11, verses 23 through 27. Hebrews 11, 23 through 27. If you're a Bible student, when I mention Hebrews 11, you're already thinking about how that's the great chapter about faith in the book of Hebrews. Person after person is listed there of what they did by faith. And we learn there of a mother. Again, in this text, her name isn't even mentioned. In fact, she's just referred to as one of Moses's parents. But let's read the text and then we'll discuss it. Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 23. We've reached the point the Hebrew writer does after mentioning people like Enoch and Abraham and Sarah and several others. He reaches another Old Testament saint, Moses, and this is what he says. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he or Moses left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured seeing him who is unseen. Again, you know the backstory, right? The Israelites, God's people, were enslaved by the Egyptians, and the time had come for God to bring his people out of that slavery, and Moses was the one chosen by God. But the story of Moses starts much earlier than just his call by God to be the one to go to Pharaoh and demand their release. In fact, Moses' story begins before he's even born, but it involves his parents, as it says here in this text. Verse 23, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. Now, although Moses' mother is not named here in the book of Hebrews, we learn in other places, like Exodus chapter 6 and verse 20, that her name was Jochebed. Jochebed, an Israelite woman, gave birth to Moses while her nation was subject to Egyptian slavery and during a time when all male babies were under the death sentence. The Pharaoh at the time, fearing the exponential growth of the Hebrews, was afraid they were going to become so numerous as to overtake them. So he initiates this program of genocide. And again, all male babies were to be put to death following birth. Yet Jochebed's faith amid distressing circumstances stands as a model to us all, right? Jochebed, Moses' mother, chose to defy the decree of Pharaoh, arguably the most powerful human on earth at this time in history, one of the most powerful ones at least. But this young Hebrew mother says, nope, not going to do what he says. I'm going to keep my son alive. And she does so at great personal risk. Again, while it said that his parents hid Moses, my guess is most of that task fell to the mother Jochebed, right? Moses' father, no doubt, was off working as a slave, making bricks for Pharaoh. So the task was left to Jochebed to hide her son for 3 months, as it says here in Hebrews 11:23. An act that set in motion Moses' life within the Egyptian community and his eventual leading of Israel out of slavery. By God's miraculous design, after Jochebed protected her son by hiding him in the reeds by the Nile in a basket where he was coincidentally, in quotes, it's no coincidence at all. Again, I would affirm that God's behind all of this, but be that as it may, as things worked themselves out, young baby Moses was found by Pharaoh's daughter, Exodus chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. And lo and behold, Jochebed was brought in to take care of the baby, her own baby. We know the backstory, don't we? Praise God for working out all of those details. And during that time, even though it's a bit of speculation, but based upon what we read here in Hebrews 11, verses 23 through 27, particularly verses 23 and 24 and 25, I think it's fair to say that Jochebed, as Moses' mother, passed her trust or faith in God onto her son. Remember, it says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden, and then again given back to Jochebed to raise the boy, or to nurse the boy, baby. And during those times, it appears, given Moses's reactions later in life, that Jochebed and Moses' father did a good job of passing on their faith in God to the young Hebrew. Yes, he grew up in an Egyptian household, but the foundation was laid by these godly parents, and likely in most cases by his mother here. By faith, Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Where did that come from? Well, I believe it would have been his upbringing. By faith, it tells us he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king. And again, credits to those who trained him in the faith. You see, Jochebed's decision to follow the faith of her ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, impacted her son Moses, who later was the one God used to lead the entire nation of Israel out of Egypt. It's an example here for not just mothers, but all parents, whether biological, adopted, or those called to be spiritual parents. It's an example for them to be discipling others in the Lord, especially their own children. It's a lesson here of the impact of quiet faithfulness on the lives of many, many others. What's the main point in all of this as I see it? Main point here in this story of this courageous woman is that each one of us has an opportunity to impart our faith to others. Maybe our own children, or help with the children of others, but each of us has an opportunity in one way or another to impact the faith of others, which can potentially impact future generations. Yes, our efforts, like perhaps Jochebed's efforts, may seem small and insignificant. But who knows what difference will be made by those whom you affect? Who knows the difference that will be made by others whom your choices have affected? What Jochebed did, perhaps, again, may seem kind of small and insignificant, but yet when you trace the life of her son Moses and how that impacted so many others, that transfers some of the honor should go to his parents and the job that they did. Finally, let's hear the story of mom number 3. Mom number 3 is a mother who kept her promise at great personal cost. A mother who kept her promise at great personal cost. This is the story of Hannah and her son Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. 1 Samuel 1, 21 through 28. Let's read the story. To set the stage for this particular text, this is, of course, following a very rough, evil, disobedient period in Israelite history, the book of Judges, the time of the Judges. But notice what we read here. Hannah, a young wife, barren, can't have children, and it causes struggles in her family. It says, then the man, this would be Hannah's husband, Elkanah, says the man Elkanah went up with all of his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. So again, the backstory is here. Hannah, a barren mother, had prayed fervently to God for a child, and God heard her prayers and blessed her with a young boy child named Samuel. And as part of Hannah's pleading, she promised God something. That was to devote her young son's life to the service of God. And that comes into play here. Hannah asked to stay home from this trip. says, but Hannah, verse 22, did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child, Samuel, is weaned. Then I will bring him that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Remain until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, till she took up with her a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought them to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, though the child was young. They slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. Hannah said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I ask of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord. He worshiped the Lord there. It's these last couple of verses, especially verses 27 and 28, that I think are the key to Hannah's example here. Again, it says, for this boy, Hannah says, I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition. He's answered my prayer, which I asked of him. But part of that prayer was a promise to God, wasn't it? To dedicate him to the Lord, as verse 28 says. Hannah says, so I dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord. See, Hannah was not able to have children prior to Samuel, yet she continued to ask God to give her a son. One evening, while sitting at the door of the temple of Shiloh, she made a vow to God, saying, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. That's verse 11 earlier in the chapter. Once again, God heard her desperate prayer, grants her request, and soon Samuel is born. Samuel's name, by the way, means I have asked for him from the Lord. Now think for a moment with me, given the circumstances of Hannah, a lot of desperate years wanting a child and not being able to have one. And she prays to God and makes some promises, some very earth-wrenching promises for a mother. How easy it would have been, don't you think, for Hannah to somehow maybe forget her promise to God, to hold this young child tight and raise him to adulthood herself? Like any mother, Hannah would have been likely deeply attached to her son. It's easy in those situations in life when you're desperate and you think back to a promise you made. It's easy to rationalize some ways out of all of that, right? Well, I'll get around to devoting him to the Lord, or whatever goes through your mind. Yet Hannah kept her word, didn't she? Rather than pretending that she never said it. That's how some people get out of their vows. Oh, I didn't really say it that way, or I said it differently. Hannah affirmed her commitment and acknowledged God's faithfulness. Since he had granted her prayer and petition, as long as Samuel lived, he would be led to the Lord, verse 28. After weaning him, Hannah took the young boy to the temple, presented to Eli the priest, who would continue to look after him and train him up to be the child, again, that God could use to minister in the temple. Well, you know, again, the ongoing story of Samuel. Samuel, like Moses, grew to be a person of great influence. Samuel grew in competence, found favor with the Lord, and was eventually confirmed as a prophet of God and a judge who would anoint Israel's first and second kings, Saul and David. And God, of course, would honor Hannah's faithfulness by blessing her with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. That's in verse 21 of chapter 1 as well. Here, the main point, I believe, is this: God honors and blesses those who endure seasons of sacrifice in order to keep their promises. Let me repeat that. God honors and blesses those who endure seasons of sacrifice in order to keep their promises. So that's the story of 3 mothers in the scriptures. Again, not necessarily perhaps some of the most well-known stories of the Bible, but yet important ones especially. For the moms within the hearing of my voice in this lesson, And the moms who are hearing this right now, you may be in the midst of your own difficult times right now, just like the unnamed woman in Second Kings, just like Jochebed, just like Hannah. Maybe you're having a rough stretch as a mother. Perhaps there's not enough to go around in your home. Perhaps you're having to make hard choices. You may be making great sacrifices. You see, being a mother who seeks to honor God in every season of life is an extremely difficult calling. I believe one of the most difficult and one of the highest callings in human history. There are spiritual forces arrayed against you as a mother. Satan wants to destroy your family. He wants to harm your children spiritually. Beyond that, there are the other critics out there that, especially in our culture, seems to downplay the role of motherhood. There are spiritual and physical forces arrayed against you in the job you're called to do. You may not be getting the help and support that you need and rightly deserve. But let me encourage you in the Lord not to give up. Please, please don't give up. Like the unnamed mother in the days of Elisha, who knows what God will do with the seemingly insignificant resources you can offer? Who knows? God has the propensity to do great things with small resources. And if you're in a season of life where there's not much to go around and you don't think you have anything to offer, don't doubt that you do. Maybe like Moses' mother, who knows what difference you are making as a mom for the generations to come. Your efforts, again, in the daily grind of raising children and keeping a home, again, it seems like maybe you're not making much difference. But yet, who knows, perhaps you're raising a Moses or someone else that will do great things for God. Or maybe like Samuel's mother, Hannah, who knows how God will bless the sacrifices you are continually making for your family. Praise God for Samuel's mother, who was willing to make the sacrifice to keep the promise she made to God. And who knows again how God will take your commitment to your promises as well and change the world around you. So hopefully those are some encouragements to the mothers that are hearing this. But you know what? Counsel we are offering today to the mothers out there is good counsel for all of us, really, not just for moms. Think about what we've talked about. I think we can learn the lessons as well. I pray that God will help us all to be faithful with what we have and trust Him to multiply it. You don't have to be a mother to do that. You can be a father or a brother or a sister or a friend. God calls us all to be faithful in what we have, not in what we don't have, but trust in God to take even meager resources and multiply it. May God help all of us to be faithful in our context and to trust God to use it to influence succeeding generations, like Moses' mother. May we be people that can use what God has given us in our circumstances, in our context, to make a difference, however insignificant it may seem, because not only can God multiply resources, but God can multiply efforts and use perhaps the ones we influence in the faith to even make a greater difference than we could even imagine. Then finally, may God help all of us to be faithful in making whatever sacrifice is necessary to keep our promises to Him and to others. Like Hannah, perhaps we pour out our hearts to God in whatever struggle we're facing, and God answers our prayers. But if we make promises to God, may we be willing to make whatever sacrifice necessary to keep our promises. We serve a God who keeps His promises and is His people. I believe we're called to do the same. Mothers make a great deal of sacrifices for their family. But all of us, in one way or another can make the sacrifices necessary to influence the kingdom of God. I pray that God will give us all the courage to do what we're called to do, to be who we're called to be, to make a difference in the world around us. Once again, thank God for all you mothers out there who are doing a great job, even though you're not getting the thanks you deserve and the pay you deserve, and the encouragement perhaps you deserve as well. God knows your efforts, and never doubt that God can take what you have, make a great difference. God bless you. All of you have a great day, a great week, and we look forward to spending some time together again next week.